and comfort their friend. Prince Musa was informed of the news as he was heading to the wedding venue. He turned back, and his mother, who was with him and well aware of what was happening since she was the one who had ruined her son's wedding, asked him what was wrong. He then explained that Fatu's dress was ruined and she had nothing to wear for the wedding. As soon as they arrived at the palace, Prince Musa rushed to Fatu to console her. "At this time, I should already be at the altar, Musa, but they have destroyed the dress. Why should this happen to me?" she cried. In her tears, she noticed the silhouette of her mother-in-law at the entrance. Queen Salima gave her a mocking smile to show that she was indeed the one who had played this dirty trick on her. Before Fatu could say anything, she quickly advanced towards her and exclaimed, "What kind of diabolical person could have done such a thing to you, my dear? I am so sorry for you. Only a monster is capable of such great wickedness." Enraged, Fatu pushed her mother-in-law so hard that she fell to the ground. Everyone in the room was stunned. "You are a monster," cried the young girl. "You did this to me. What is wrong with you?" Prince Musa, confused, asked. "What is wrong, Fatu?" He approached his mother to help her up. "I am not crazy, Musa," Fatu began. "Your mother destroyed the dress, and she knows it very well. What have I done to deserve such a thing? Listen to me, Fatu. I know that you are in a state of distress right now because your dress is ruined, but you shouldn't accuse my mother like that." Meanwhile, Queen Salima was rejoicing in her heart. Her plan was working just as she had intended. She wanted to sow discord and conflict between the two, and everything was happening right before her eyes. "My dear, why would you say such a thing? Why would I destroy your dress? You know very well that I welcomed you here in the palace and that my room is not even close to yours. I am completely on the other side of the palace, so why are you accusing me of such a terrible thing?" Everyone was astonished at Fatu's reaction. Even her friends did not agree with her. "She is sad and desperately looking for someone to blame," said one of her friends, crying. Fatu continued, "If I am treated this way even before the wedding, what kind of treatment should I expect afterward? It is clear that this marriage will be nothing but a nightmare for me. I don't want to get married anymore." "Let's forget about this wedding," she asserted harshly. Everyone was pleading with her to stay and not cancel the wedding. Meanwhile, the king heard everything that was happening. He asked to see Fatu to better understand and get to the bottom of the situation. The king attentively listened to all of Fatu's explanations. "This morning, after my bath, when I was supposed to put on my wedding dress, I found it stained with red oil. I also think it was the queen who did this because I saw it in her eyes," she said. The king couldn't believe that his wife was capable of such a thing. He was surprised by the accusation, but thought it might be due to Fatu's emotional state and that she might not be fully aware of what she was saying. He understood Fatu's disappointment and promised to find out who was responsible for all this. He convinced her to go through with the marriage to Prince Musa, promising to arrange everything so she could have the perfect wedding she had always dreamed of, even if she couldn't wear the beautiful dress she wanted this morning. The king had many wonderful things planned for her. Remaining polite and courteous, Fatu finally agreed to marry the prince. The king, meanwhile, ordered the guards to find the best tailor in the region to personally make Fatu's dress. As she left, Prince Musa was waiting for Fatu at the door. He apologized and asked her to forgive him for losing his temper earlier, but he still tried to convince her that it wasn't his mother who had ruined her dress, but surely someone else. A few hours later, Fatu received her new dress. Guests began to arrive at the palace, and in the crowd she spotted her aunt Iyabo, the only maternal relative she had left. She was so happy to see her again after all these years. She got ready again and, with the help of her friends, put on her new dress, the one the king had given her. She was more ready than ever to marry Prince Musa. The wedding ceremony was very festive. Everyone enjoyed themselves and danced. The celebration was beautiful. The king even gave the couple a magnificent mansion as a wedding gift. Fatu was beyond happy. She didn't want to live near her mother-in-law at all. This gift was the best thing she could have received. A few days after the wedding, the young couple moved away from the palace into their new home. Fatu was already imagining her new life and all the happy moments they would share together. Queen Salima, on the other hand, was so angry. She didn't want to let her son go far from her. She was ready to do anything to have him only for herself. Her obsession with Musa was limitless. She desperately searched for a way to keep Musa close to her. Being a great manipulator, she decided to fake an illness. She asked her son to come home to take care of her. At the beginning of the marriage, Fatu found herself already alone in their house with her pregnancy. She was a bit sad but consoled herself with the fact that at least her wicked mother-in-law was far from her. Musa yielded to all his mother's whims. One afternoon, while Fatu was cooking, she heard someone knocking at the door. She was 6 months pregnant. As soon as she opened the door, she was surprised to see her mother-in-law, Queen Salima. She looked sick, and her face was tense. "Come in," called Musa from the other side of the room. "What's wrong, Mom? Are you sick?" he asked worriedly. To show that she was suffering, she deliberately slipped and fell in the kitchen, holding her hand to her chest. Fatu was really overwhelmed this time. She couldn't imagine that Salima would go this far just to have her son to herself. She knew Salima was only acting and that it was all part of her ridiculous plans. "I think I have a fever, my son," groaned Queen Salima. "Please, my son, take care of me. I am really not well." At these words, Musa rushed into the kitchen to fetch a glass of water for his mother. Fatu just watched the scene in silence. She watched her husband take care of his mother and bring her everything she wanted, while she could barely stand up properly. The queen kept smiling at Fatu to show her that she had control over her son. He did almost everything she asked without hesitation. Days passed, but Queen Salima was still in the young couple's house. She was a real obstacle for Fatu because she did absolutely nothing around the house but constantly made snide remarks to the young woman. She always pretended to be very weak and unable to do anything. But as if that wasn't enough, she demanded that her son bring her meals to her room every day. When Musa went to her, she made sure to fill his ears with nonsense. Fatu still said nothing. She just observed and kept silent. After all, she couldn't ask Musa not to take care of his mother. Days turned into weeks, and Queen Salima still didn't want to return home. Moreover, she became increasingly more besides being unbearable. She now always found things to criticize about Fatu. She made comments about her cooking, telling her she had no taste and that her house wasn't well decorated. She rearranged the furniture to her liking without even asking her daughter-in-law's opinion. She did whatever she wanted, as if she were in her own home and no one could stop her. She even tried to keep Musa for herself and no longer allowed him to stay with his wife. Every day it was the same thing. She was completely ignored and neglected in her own home. She felt like a second-class citizen. It was as if she were the one visiting the Queen. Her husband, always with his mother who told him whatever she wanted, always defended his mother and gave her all the attention he deprived his partner of. One day, Fatu had enough of her mother-in-law's behaviour. She confronted her husband, begging him to do something and telling him that his mother was manipulating him at her will. Musa, however, saw no fault in his mother. He said, "How can you say such a thing, Fatu? How can you treat my mother like that? What do you want me like that? What do you want me to do? You know well that my mother is sick and that I'm the only person she has to take care of her. It's my mother, Fatu. Can't you see that?" Fatu began to cry and left the room without a word. What could she say now to avoid being seen as the villain in the story? She finally decided to keep to herself. The next morning, Queen Salima saw Fatu eating and said, "Always eating, I see. I'm not surprised. No wonder you're so fat. You look like a cow. Fatou cried all the time, looking for a way to end the nightmare she was living daily. Her mother-in-law was the cause of everything that was happening to her. She mocked her, criticised her, and above all, didn't allow her the chance to be with her husband despite her pregnancy. Deep down, she knew Musa was a good man and that he was just fair. Under the influence of her mother, Fatou was now a month away from giving birth. Queen Salima was tired of having to act every day. She then thought about going to see a village sorcerer to cast a spell on Fatou to end it. If Fatou dies, I could live alone with my son and nothing could stop me. Fatou is my only and unique obstacle. I think it is time to end this. Early in the morning, after Musa had left the house for his activities, Queen Salima went to see a powerful village sorcerer. His name was Chanto. He was a very powerful old sorcerer who had lived for 200 years and was still alive. He was feared by all the villagers. When she arrived at the sorcerer's house, Salima explained that she wanted to cast a spell on her daughter-in-law to kill her so that her son would come back and live with her and her alone. The sorcerer demanded a lot of money from Salima because he knew she was the queen. Salima replied, "No matter how much money you want, I will give it to you. I just want you to do it as quickly as possible and for it to remain between you and me." Chanto took the money and asked Salima for her daughter-in-law's name. "Her name is Fatou Bisola," Salima answered. The sorcerer wrote Fatou's name on a piece of paper. He went alone into another room, uttered incantations, and cast a spell on Fatou. "It's done, madam. In 3 days you will come back to thank me," the sorcerer told her. Salima went home very happy. Why didn't I think of this sooner? She wondered. That same night, Fatou had a bad dream in which someone had cast a spell on her, and she lost her life along with her baby. She woke up in the middle of the night, startled, her clothes soaked in sweat because she had perspired heavily. She was alone in the room because Musa was sleeping with his mother to look after her as she pretended to be sick. She was so scared and her heart was beating very fast. She quickly got on her knees and began to pray, "Lord, I have no one to confide in. You are the only one who watches over me. My parents are no longer here and now I fear that something will happen to me and my child. I do not feel safe living here with my mother-in-law." She sat for a while looking at her belly and crying hot tears. Then she continued to pray until the next day. The next day, after eating, Salima began to feel unwell. She had both a headache and stomachache, her body was hot, and she was trembling terribly. Her son Musa, sensing that something was wrong, ran to help her. "What's wrong, Mum? Are you all right?" "I just finished eating your wife's food and now I feel very sick. Your wife poisoned me, Musa," Salima replied, crying. Musa was red with anger. He ordered Fatou to leave his house immediately. "How can you poison my mother, Fatou? How can you do such a thing?" "But I did nothing, darling. I didn't poison your mother," Fatou replied. "Get out of my house immediately," Musa repeated, pushing Fatou violently. Fatou was desperate. She was a month away from giving birth and now found herself outside. She went to her Aunt Iabo's house, who welcomed her and took care of her. Musa prepared all the herbal teas he knew for his mother-in-law, but nothing worked. The next day, Salima still wasn't better. She even started convulsing. Frightened, Musa ran to call a village marabout. The marabout arrived and revealed to Musa that his mother was the cause of her own ailment. "Your mother cast a spell on your wife, Fatou, to kill her. Didn't your wife pray a lot last night?" "I don't know. I didn't sleep with her," Musa replied. "Your wife's prayers caused the spell Salima cast on her to backfire." Musa couldn't believe his ears. How could my mother do such a thing, casting a spell on my wife? What did she do to deserve this? He asked himself many questions and even forgot that the marabout was still standing there waiting. "Can I leave now?" the marabout asked. Please, what can we do now to save my mother? I will give you an herbal tea that you will give to your mother. As soon as she drinks it, she will feel a bit better. Afterward, she will have to confess in front of the whole village that she is the one who tried to cast a spell on Fatu. If she doesn't do it within the next 3 days, she will die. The marabout gave the herbal tea to Musa and left. Musa put the tea in his mother's mouth. The next day, she felt better. Musa went to see his father, the king, to explain the situation. "Father, my mother cast a spell on my wife Fatu to kill her. My wife prayed a lot during the night and now the spell has backfired. The marabout told us that my mother must confess this heinous act in front of all the villagers, or she will die in 3 days." The king was very surprised to learn that his wife had cast a spell on his daughter-in-law. He sent a guard to announce to all the villagers that the king had a meeting with them the next day. The next day, all the villagers gathered in the palace courtyard and were already waiting for the king. They all wondered why the king had summoned them, because it had been a long time since he had done so. A few minutes later, the king arrived and took his seat. Musa and his mother also arrived. The king spoke. "Good morning, everyone. Queen Salima has something to tell you this morning. I will let her speak so as not to waste time." The queen stepped forward, utterly ashamed, and began to explain. "The day before yesterday, I went to see the village sorcerer to cast a spell on my daughter-in-law Fatu to kill her because I was tired of her keeping my son away from me. Unfortunately, the spell backfired on me, and if I did not come to confess this act to you today, I would have died." All the people present were shocked by what she had just said. "What a shame! What a shame!" the crowd cried. Salima was so ashamed she didn't know where to hide. "You are also the one who spilled red oil on Fatu's wedding dress on her wedding day, aren't you?" asked the king. "Yes, it was me," Salima replied. All the villagers shouted, "Witch, witch!" The king then spoke. "Thank you all for coming. This is what Queen Salima wanted to tell you." Queen Salima, covered in shame, ran to her room crying. The king ended the meeting and everyone began to leave. Musa saw Fatu and her Aunt Iabo in the crowd and ran toward them. Musa knelt before his wife Fatu, crying. "I am sorry, darling. I was blinded by my mother. I am truly sorry for making you go through all this. Please, darling, come back with me to our home." Fatu knew her husband was not to blame and forgave him. They returned home together. When they arrived home, Fatu noticed that her mother-in-law, Salima, was no longer there. She had fled to live alone at the other end of the village, too ashamed to look her son Musa in the eye. Fatu now lived alone with her husband, and he enjoyed all her love. A few weeks later, Fatu gave birth to twins at the hospital. She was very happy, and her husband was also overjoyed. They lived a perfect love, far from Salima's wickedness. If you like this story, please just leave a like and a comment of encouragement. That's all I ask of you. It will only take a few seconds and it will help me advance my channel quickly because it is very challenging to create and illustrate stories. Just a like and a comment, please. I am counting on your kindness.